This is an original poem called For Dionysus. If I find Dionysus, I will suck his tongue dry and beg him for one sip from the chalice of everlasting desire. For if I must live upon this ball of sorrow until life floats up and out of me, then I shall live with never quenched thirst and a hope that sets flame to every sadness. Okay, so this is the first episode of the podcast, The Ache, and I wanted to come on here and talk a little bit about why I wanted to make this podcast. So my journey as a person, and I think also my journey as an artist and with my spirituality, started when I was a child. I was raised very religious, and there was a real beauty to it. It taught me a lot about faith and about hope and belief in something unseen. I think, it had a lot of downsides for me, but it also had a lot of upsides because I learned how to believe in and trust in something that I couldn't see. And I think that has actually turned into one of my greatest strengths in my life. But it took a long journey. There was always something inside of me that did not resonate with the Christian culture that I was raised in, and felt this, the name of the podcast is this ache. I had this ache inside of me that wanted to be more me. I felt for a lot of my early life, I was fighting against that part of me. There was this, fear of my own emotions, my own anger, my own sexuality, and I was deeply afraid of it. I thought those things came from, I was taught those things came from an evil force, that they came from the devil. And my life was a lot of unlearning. It was a lot of learning to look at those parts of me as worthy and allow them to function in healthy ways and function in ways that are pushing me towards growth. My anger became, instead of something that I was suppressing and then would burst out in these moments of intensity, it became like a warning system. It became like a way that I would know, oh, I'm feeling angry. Okay, no, I know a boundary of mine is being crossed, or maybe I'm not standing up for myself in the way I need to, or perhaps I'm angry at myself because I'm not prioritizing the things that I want to be prioritizing. And my sexuality, that's a really long journey that deserves its own its own series, because it's been so prominent in both my life and my work and who I am as a person. But my journey was going from that ache inside of me that wanted to express my sexuality and that was looking for ways to do that, but then at the same time feeling very ashamed of that and feeling sure that it meant that there was something evil or deviant about me. So this podcast is a space to have longer form conversations with people in my life, people who I've intersected with either creatively or through friendships, or people that I've worked with, who I feel are people that are reaching deeper into themselves and reaching towards that ache, that desire to align their life with something that feels authentic to them. I feel like the word authentic is thrown around so much these days and is such a buzzword. And I think it can mean a lot of things. I think that for me, in terms of this podcast, I just wanted to have real conversations with people living lives that are maybe a little bit off the beaten path, or they're living creative lives, they're living the artist life, or they've, made a big scary transition from one field to another that, forced them to rely on that faith, that little flame inside of them, that little ache inside of them that said, I do want something more, I do want something deeper. So yeah, it's a collection of conversations that I've been having over the past, I guess it's been 8 months, that I've been collecting all of these, maybe less, maybe 6 months. I don't know. It's been a number of months that I've been collecting these conversations, and I'm not really sure where this is going to go. I plan to release the first batch of them and then potentially do a second season if I'm feeling up to it. I don't know. I wanted the podcast to have feminine timing. I didn't want to create another thing in my life that I had to keep up with on a weekly basis and release, force myself to release content all the time. I wanted to spend a little more time curating the guests and then also recording or editing and adding the music. And I collaborated with a friend of mine, Peter Colombo, for the music that you're hearing behind this podcast. He provided me these beautiful compositions of his that he had on hand, and he also made some amazing video content that you'll see with the clips that are being posted. So I wanted to create something that was a little bit more of a hybrid podcast art project that, I spent a little more time on and wasn't just something that I was pumping out for the sake of pumping it out, and had something that had a bit more attention to detail. And, I didn't want to kick myself into the hamster wheel of feeling pressured to constantly produce content. So I'm going to kind of just let it find its own way and find the listeners that it wants to find, and hopefully it resonates with some people. And if not, I had a great time having all of these conversations, because it's a lot of people in my life that I might be close to in different ways, but it was sort of a big, I don't want to say ruse, because it's not a ruse. It's still the project in and of itself, but the benefit to me that was underlying all of it was that I got to ask people deeper questions about their past and their journey that maybe we've never had an opportunity to talk about, but that I was always curious about. I'm someone that's always, there's different types of people in terms of how we share information and get other people to share information with us. And I've always been someone that demonstrates what I want the other person to do. So I've always felt uncomfortable asking people pointed questions because I'm so much of a sharer. I have no problem just opening up and starting to share with people information and share with them, very what they might think is private information about myself. I've always been comfortable just saying, oh yeah, I've had that experience too. Here's what I felt. And I've done that as a way of modeling, as a way of demonstrating, to take the pressure in, I think it was a learned behavior as a child perhaps, but to take the pressure off of the other person, the pressure of me asking them a pointed question. I think as a child, maybe I felt pressure when people would ask me certain pointed questions, especially around Christianity or belief systems or, whatever. So I've always been someone that models by sharing rather than by asking questions. So, and then, always just hoping that the other person would start sharing a lot. My partner and I talk about this a lot because he's the opposite. He's someone that needs to be asked because he feels it's rude to share without being asked, versus I feel maybe it's rude to ask someone directly, and I'll just sometimes share. Or I don't feel that way anymore, but I think that was my natural conditioning. Now I feel much more comfortable asking directly and being direct than I did when I was younger. So this podcast is also, a marker of that for me as a person, of being like, hey, this is something that I've integrated. I'm now just bringing people on and asking them direct questions. And that's another theme of the podcast, is just, the concept of integration of parts of ourselves, the recognition of parts of ourselves that, were unconscious, and then bringing them into the conscious. Something that I talk about and think about a lot is shadow integration, which is a Jungian concept of acknowledging and accepting parts of the self that have been repressed or pushed into the quote unquote like shadow of your unconscious. And so, integrating the parts of yourselves that you previously felt were like bad or immoral or wrong or were punished for having, and creating spaces for those aspects of yourself to come out. I've gotten really experimental with this in my life. A big thing for me was feeling like I was too sexual or too like sexy when I was young, would definitely put me like in the hot spot. I had a big fat middle finger to it as like a teenager, and was just like, I'm gonna fucking have my tits out and wear like low tops and wear high shorts. I don't care. Like, fuck you. But that was also a reaction, it wasn't an integration. It was me being like, yeah, I am bad. So what? So I'm not righteous. And I think I've come full circle with that. Like, so in my experimentation with shadow integration, one thing that I did was create like a private Instagram. Some of you listening probably, I would imagine most of you know me that are listening to this, but I created like a private Instagram that was like only people that knew me for the most part, or mostly people that were in my day-to-day life platonically, as friends, or like, people I thought would sort of get it. And I invited them to follow the page. And then that page became sort of me posting like irreverent things about like me and Christ, and like sexy pictures, thoughty like photos and videos of me like in my full expression of that, because a big part of my I felt ostracized from my Christian community growing up, and, coming of age and becoming an adult. I felt extremely ostracized because I was viewed as being immoral and wrong for having premarital sex, and for being involved in Hollywood, and being involved in my now profession, which is intimacy coordination, and filmmaking, and making films about, writing and directing films about sex and sexuality. And so I was very much like felt very cast out of my community for those things. And so making the private Instagram, that was comprised of a community of people that knew me personally, who would witness and celebrate me being silly, sexual, like over the top, like just ridiculous with it, and not leave me and actually embrace me for it, was a big form of shadow integration for me. I felt like once I learned about this concept, I started trying to find fun ways like that in my life to integrate it. And obviously that didn't go perfectly. I had people on the page that like didn't understand fully what was going on and reacted poorly, and I just removed them. That's fine. And, had triggers that came with that and whatnot. But yeah, this podcast is also a space where I'm having conversations about that. I'm having conversations about people going into the darker aspects of themselves and coming out the other side. So, yeah, welcome to the ache. I hope you like it. More to come. Thank you for listening to The Ache. This podcast is produced by myself, Corrin Evans, and Alexis Murphy. All of the music that you hear here is original compositions by my good friend Peter Colombo. Any other pertinent information will be linked in the show notes, and thank you for listening.